How do you define love?
Oh, that is a loaded question right out of the gate.
Right. I mean, if you look around at modern culture, the definition is almost always tied up in, sentimentality.
Yeah, completely. It's very feelings-based.
Yeah, it's about affirming whatever someone else desires. It means avoiding judgment at all costs and just being generally agreeable.
Don't rock the boat, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me rephrase that. Spot on. But what if real love is actually incredibly rigid?
Okay, that's a pivot.
What if it is tied to strict, unbending rules and, motivated by a ticking clock, like an impending deadline that literally forces you into action?
That is definitely not the greeting card definition of
Right?
love.
It's not. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are taking a deep dive into some extensive commentary and historical source material on a highly specific passage of Scripture.
Romans chapter 13, verses 9 through 13.
Yeah, that's the one. We are looking at sources that unpack the Apostle Paul's startling claim that the moral law is fulfilled by love.
And that believers must urgently wake up and put on heavy military armor because the night is almost over.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we look at the verses themselves, we have to grasp the extreme environment where these words first landed.
Yeah, you really can't read a letter like Romans as if it were written in a sterile vacuum.
Right. You, as the listener, need to know the boots-on-the-ground reality of these people.
Context is absolutely vital here. So we are looking at the year AD 57, roughly.
Okay.
And the Apostle Paul is writing this letter from the city of Corinth, and he is sending it across the Mediterranean to Rome.
So Rome in AD 57, what is happening politically?
Well, Rome at this time is under the early reign of a young emperor Nero.
Oh, Nero. That name carries a lot of baggage.
It does, yeah. Historians often call this specific period the Quinquennium Neronis.
The what?
The Quinquennium Neronis. It just means the first 5 years of Nero's rule.
Ah, okay. And from the outside, those first 5 years looked pretty good to the average Roman citizen, right?
Yeah, they did.
Because he was guided by his tutor, the Stoic philosopher Seneca. So the empire appeared politically stable.
Right, the administration was actually functioning.
The streets were relatively orderly. It had this, this veneer of the Pax Romana, the famous Roman peace.
A very deceptive piece, though.
How so?
Because underneath that polished marble surface, Rome was a boiling cauldron. I mean, it was the absolute epicenter of ancient paganism.
Which meant what, practically speaking, for someone walking down the street?
You had massive temples dedicated not just to the pantheon of gods, like Jupiter and Mars, but to the genius of the emperor himself.
So state-sponsored idolatry everywhere you look.
Everywhere. And the social reality was staggering.
Let's talk about that wealth gap, because that's always a big factor.
Oh, it was massive. You had patricians living in these sprawling villas on the Palatine Hill.
Right.
They had radiant floor heating and private baths, while massive populations lived in squalid, dangerous, multi-story tenements.
They call those insulae, right?
Yes, insulae. These were essentially ancient skyscrapers made of wood and cheap brick.
And they were fire traps.
Complete fire traps. They caught fire constantly. Whole neighborhoods would literally just burn to the ground.
Wow. And then plus the brutal realities of slavery.
Yeah, a huge percentage of the Roman population were enslaved people.
Human beings treated as literal property.
Yes, fueling the massive imperial economy and, the domestic lives of the elite.
It's just a brutal system.
It was. And on top of that, you had the public baths, the gladiatorial arenas.
Where blood sport and execution were considered like mass entertainment.
Right. And you had wild pagan feasts that spilled out into the public squares. It was an environment of just unbridled arrogance and moral decay, celebrated openly.
Okay, so hold that picture in your mind. Now, contrast that massive, intimidating imperial machine with the reality of the church in Rome.
It's quite a contrast.
They were not meeting in grand cathedrals with stained glass.
No, not at all.
They were tiny, scattered house churches. Maybe a few dozen people crammed into a dining room in the slums, trying to figure out how to worship Christ in the shadow of Nero's palace.
And from what the sources tell us, their demographics were incredibly complicated.
Highly complicated. The church was this tense mix of Jewish believers and Gentile believers.
Right, and we have to factor in a massive historical event that happened just a few years prior.
Which was
The previous emperor, Claudius, had expelled all the Jews from Rome
Wait, why were the Jewish believers expelled in the first place? I mean, what caused that?
because of riots. The Roman historian Suetonius records that there were constant disturbances in the Jewish quarter.
Disturbances over what?
Well, Suetonius says it was at the instigation of Chrestus.
Crassus.
Yeah. Most historians believe this was actually a massive dispute over the claims of Jesus Christ.
Oh, wow. So they were arguing about whether Jesus was the Messiah.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. So Claudius gets fed up, simply issues an edict, and banishes all Jews from the city to restore order.
That means all the Jewish Christians had to pack up and leave their homes,
Precisely. They were just gone.
leaving only the Gentile Christians behind.
Yes. The Gentile Christians stayed behind. And they led these house churches for years.
So their customs developed in a very Gentile context.
Right. They did not keep kosher diets.
Yep.
They did not observe the Sabbath rituals or Jewish feast days.
But then Claudius dies.
Claudius dies, the edict expires, and the Jewish believers move back to Rome.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. They walk back into these house churches, and suddenly you have this intense cultural clash.
You have Jewish believers who meticulously keep dietary laws sitting next to Gentiles who were saved out of pagan temples and have zero background in the Mosaic law.
Right.
That is a recipe for massive conflict. So think about it like this.
Yeah.
Imagine receiving a letter commanding you to live with perfect moral purity while living in the middle of a modern-day Las Vegas.
Okay. Yeah.
But add to that the pressure of a hostile political regime watching your every move.
Right.
And you are sitting in a room with people who have completely different cultural habits and backgrounds than you do. It is an absolute powder keg.
What's fascinating here is how Paul handles that powder keg.
What does he do?
Look at what he ignores. He completely ignores the structural politics of Rome.
He doesn't even mention them.
He really doesn't. He isn't writing a manifesto on how to organize a political revolt to overthrow Nero.
Right.
He does not offer a program for social domination.
So what is he doing?
Instead, he is issuing marching orders for a pilgrim assembly. He is writing to people living as aliens in a hostile empire, giving them instructions on how to operate on enemy soil without assimilating into the darkness around them.
So if you are going to tell people living in first century Rome to pull off this incredible level of obedience, you have to explain how they can actually do it.
You do.
We are moving from the realm of abstract theology into boots on the ground duty. But how does Paul bridge that gap?
To understand the ethical commands here in chapter 13, you must understand the literary bedrock of chapters 1 through 11.
Okay, give us the recap of those chapters.
In those first 11 chapters, Paul constructs a massive, airtight theological argument.
Right.
He establishes the total depravity of all mankind, that no human being naturally seeks God and no one does good.
None at all.
He lays out the necessity of penal substitutionary atonement.
Meaning Christ actively taking the wrath and punishment for sinners on the cross.
Yes. And he argues extensively for justification by faith alone, entirely apart from human works.
He spends 11 chapters making it crystal clear that human beings are completely incapable of saving themselves.
Right. Our works are filthy rags.
But then you hit chapter 12, and he uses this massive therefore.
Ah, yes. The great pivot.
Based on all that theology, here is how you must live. Correct doctrine must yield correct duty.
The indicative, what God has already done, always grounds the imperative, what we are commanded to do.
Okay, so that brings us to chapter 13.
Right. Then you move into chapter 13. The first 7 verses dictate how the Christian relates to the civil government, state house.
Right. Paul commands subjection to the governing authorities, paying taxes, giving proper honor to magistrates.
He tells them to pay their earthly debts.
But then we hit verse 8, which pivots from the state house to the street and to the heart.
Yes, a major shift.
He says, while earthly debts to the government must be paid, there is one permanent unpayable debt.
The debt to love one another.
That transition is critical to his logic, isn't it?
It is. Think about it. Earthly taxes can be settled. You pay the customs official, the transaction is over, and the debt is cleared.
Right, you get your receipt and walk away.
But the obligation to love your neighbor is perpetual.
It never ends.
Every single time you encounter another human being, that debt is active again. You can never say, well, I loved my neighbor yesterday, so my account is settled for the month.
But I want to push back on this logic for a second on behalf of the listener who might be feeling a bit of theological whiplash right now.
Sure, go for it.
If Paul spends chapters 1 through 11 proving that humans are totally depraved,
right,
that we cannot earn our way to God, and that we can only be saved by sheer grace, Why is he suddenly handing them a massive to-do list?
It's a fair question.
Doesn't handing out a rigorous moral checklist completely contradict the grace he just spent 11 chapters defending?
That is the very tension that has caused endless theological debate for centuries.
I can imagine.
And it requires a crucial distinction against a concept known as antinomianism.
Antinomianism, anti-law, meaning people who think the law is dead.
Correct. Antinomianism is the false idea that grace cancels the moral law.
Like because we are forgiven, the rules just no longer apply to our daily conduct.
Yeah, that's the claim. But in Protestant thought, particularly within the framework we are analyzing, there is something called the third use of the law.
Break that down for me. What are the first two uses, just for context?
The first use is civil. The law restrains societal evil through the threat of punishment.
Like speed limits keeping people from driving 100 miles an hour.
Right. The second use is pedagogical. It acts as a mirror to expose our sin, showing us our failure and driving us to Christ for salvation.
Okay, so what is the third use?
The third use applies specifically to the justified believer. The law no longer condemns the believer because Christ took the condemnation.
So it's not hanging over our heads as a threat anymore.
No, but it now functions as a perfect rule of life.
Ah, it is not a ladder you climb to get into heaven. It is the path you walk on once you are already inside.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Wow, okay.
Grace does not obliterate the standard of holiness. The moral law tells the believer what the will of God actually is.
It gives shape to it.
Yes. It directs them, it binds their conscience to walk accordingly. It is the living, breathing response of gratitude from those who have already received mercy.
So if the moral law is the rule of life, how does it connect to this debt of love Paul brings up?
Well, in verses 9 and 10, Paul gets very specific about what love actually looks like.
He doesn't just leave it vague.
No,
Go
and
on.
he does it by bringing up the 10 Commandments.
He quotes directly from the second table of the Decalogue.
He does.
As you know, the feast table deals with our duty to God. No other gods, no idols, honoring his name, keeping the Sabbath.
Right.
But the second table deals with our duty to our fellow human beings. Paul lists them out explicitly. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet.
He is laying down hard, uncompromising boundaries.
Let's break those down. Adultery violates the covenant of marriage and destroys the family unit.
Murder attacks the very image of God in another person.
Theft takes what God sovereignly entrusted to someone else.
False witness destroys justice and ruins reputations in the community.
And coveting is that inward poison of discontent that breeds all the outward sins.
And then Paul does something brilliant with the Greek syntax to tie it all together.
What does he do?
He uses a specific term, anakephaleotai.
Anakephaleotai. Say that 5 times fast.
I won't try. It is a heavy architectural word. It means to sum up or to bring multiple scattered items under a single headship. He says all of these specific prohibitions are summed up in one ancient command from Leviticus 19.18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself.
So he takes the rigid boundaries of the 10 Commandments and says they all roll up into this one directive.
Yeah.
But the word he uses for love is agape.
Right. Yes, agape.
And that's different from how the world views love.
Agape is completely distinct from other Greek words for love. You have eros, which is romantic or sexual desire,
Right.
or philia, which is brotherly affection and companionship.
So how is agape different?
Agape is an active moral strength. It is a principled, self-giving disposition directed toward the true good of another person. It actively refuses to cause injury.
That flies in the face of how the Romans operated.
Complete.
Roman society was built on patronage. You scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Right, it was entirely transactional.
You only showed favor to someone who could advance your social standing.
But Paul concludes this thought by saying that love is the pleroma of the law. Pleroma means the full measure, the complete satisfaction, or the intended realization of something.
So what does this all mean?
It means that real love isn't a squishy, effeminate emotion.
It is not just feeling warm fuzzies towards someone or giving them a hug.
No. Real love is rigorously obeying God's boundaries for the benefit of someone else.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
It shows us that true, invisible piety toward God is always tangibly manifested through visible integrity toward fellow humans.
that's a huge point. You cannot claim to love God whom you cannot see if you're actively harming your neighbor whom you can see.
Love supplies the heart direction, and the law tells love what good and evil actually are.
But hold on, let's apply this to modern reality.
Let's do it.
If my neighbor is engaging in something the Bible calls a work of darkness, and I tell them they are wrong, modern society says I am committing an act of hate.
Right.
Or, on a smaller scale, if I tell my neighbor a lie to protect their feelings, modern culture calls that being loving.
Yeah, keeping the peace.
But the law says, do not bear false witness. How did Paul expect Roman Christians to enforce these boundaries without just sounding like massive judgmental hypocrites to their pagan neighbors?
Because biblical love rejoices in the truth and actively wills the neighbor's genuine welfare according to God's revealed will, not society's shifting standards.
Okay, that makes sense.
Tolerating destructive behavior isn't love. Refusing to establish boundaries isn't love.
Give me an example.
If you see a blind man walking toward a cliff, affirming his chosen path is not an act of agape.
No, it's terrible.
Warning him, even if it offends him in the moment, is the fulfillment of the law.
Okay, so love requires action. It requires a rigorous adherence to these boundaries.
It does.
But human nature is prone to procrastination.
Very much so.
If the standard of love is this impossibly high, and we are living in a city that actively rewards the opposite, human nature is just going to say, I will get holy tomorrow.
Right. Let me enjoy the Roman bath today, and I will be a perfectly loving neighbor next week.
Exactly. How does Paul prevent these believers from just hitting the snooze button on their spiritual lives?
He adds a ticking clock.
A clock.
He forces them into motion by waking them up to redemptive time. This is verse 11.
What does verse 11 say?
Paul writes, knowing the time, but the Greek word he uses for time is vital to understanding the urgency.
What is the word?
It is kairos.
Break those two down for me. I know there are a couple of different words for time in Greek.
There are. The most common word is chronos.
Okay.
Chronos is clock time. It is the ticking of seconds, minutes, hours. It is chronological, linear time.
Right.
But kairos refers to a strategic, divinely appointed epoch. It is a highly specific, redemptive season.
I think of it this way. Chronos is just the ticking clock on my wall. It is knowing that today is the 14th of the month.
Right, that is just raw data.
Kairos is realizing the alarm is going off because the 14th is your wedding day.
Oh, that is an excellent analogy.
One is just a number on a calendar. The other demands you put on a tuxedo and get moving because a massive life-altering event is imminent.
Yes. Because of kairos, because the alarm is ringing, Paul issues a command. It is time to wake from sleep.
The alarm is going off.
The Greek word here is egerthenai, and the grammar here is a beautiful picture of Protestant theology. It is an aorist passive verb.
I didn't take ancient Greek. What is an aorist passive verb?
An imperative verb is a direct command, do this action. But a passive verb means the action is happening to you.
Okay.
So you have a commanded duty to wake up, yet the operative strength to actually accomplish that awakening belongs entirely to the monergistic grace of the Holy Spirit.
Wait, so it's like being in a spiritual coma.
Basically, yeah.
You can't wake yourself up just by sheer willpower. A doctor has to administer a shot of adrenaline to jolt your system.
That's a great way to put it.
God is the doctor administering the spiritual adrenaline.
Yes. Monergistic meaning God works alone to provide the energy of the new birth. We are commanded to wake up, but God supplies both the alarm clock and the adrenaline to get us out of bed.
And Paul gives a reason for this urgency. Right?
Yes, he gives the definitive reason. Salvation is nearer than when we believed.
Now, wait a second. If Paul is writing to the church in Rome, they're already believers.
True.
Aren't they already saved? Why is salvation described in the future tense here?
Because salvation in Scripture is spoken of in 3 distinct tenses.
Okay, what are they?
We have been saved. That is justification, being declared righteous in the courtroom of God the moment we believe.
Past tense.
We are being saved. That is sanctification, the daily, grueling growth in holiness.
Present continuous.
And we will be saved. That is glorification, the future bodily redemption when Christ returns.
Future tense.
Paul is talking about glorification here. The final consummation of redemptive history is closer today than it was yesterday.
And because that clock is ticking down to 0, spiritual sleep is completely unacceptable.
Spiritual sleep is a deadly condition, and it is highly deceptive.
What does it look like?
It isn't just someone who stops going to church and becomes an atheist. A sleeping Christian can look very active on paper.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They might be doctrinally informed, reading all the right books, but entirely prayerless.
Wow, that is close to home for a lot of people.
They might be outwardly respectable, holding a prominent position in society, but inwardly compromised by secret habits.
Just going through the ordinary routines.
Right, maybe sedated by entertainment or dulled by economic prosperity, completely insensible to the fact that eternity is rushing toward them like a freight train.
Is going through the motions. Arguing about precise theological distinctions online, but having zero actual affection for Christ or urgency for personal holiness.
And Paul says that lethargy has to end immediately. The passing of every single hour brings the believer nearer to the full salvation that will be revealed.
So the alarm goes off. What is the believer supposed to do?
Well, you can't just stay there.
Right, you can't just lie there in bed with your eyes open staring at the ceiling. You have to get dressed.
Verse 12 heightens the imagery.
What does he say?
Paul says, the night is far spent. The Greek word prokopsin means a path has been cut forward.
Okay.
The dark era of this present evil age is rapidly running out of time. Then he says, the day is at hand.
The day is at hand.
The word enjekin is a perfect active indicative.
Which means?
It means the day has drawn near and it remains imminent. The dawn is threatening to break over the horizon at any second.
So we have to get ready for the day.
Right. Because of that reality, Paul uses baptismal imagery. He tells them to cast off the works of darkness, apothemetha, to strip off filthy, soiled rags.
Take out the pajamas of the night.
Yes, and then indusametha, to put on the new.
But I want to look closely at what he tells them to put on.
It's very specific.
He doesn't just say, put on clothes of light or put on a bright, happy tunic.
He doesn't.
He specifically says, put on the armor of light.
The Greek is hopla to photos.
Why use heavy military terminology for a passage that is fundamentally about loving your neighbor?
Because sanctification is an aggressive, unrelenting war.
It's not a walk in the park.
Not at all. We are soldiers stationed on enemy soil. The world, the flesh, and the devil are actively opposing the believer.
So trying to genuinely love your neighbor, trying to maintain purity and integrity in a pagan world like first century Rome.
Or 21st century culture.
Right. That is not a passive retreat into a monastery.
That is a daily combat operation.
You are fighting against your own fleshly desires, and you are fighting against the immense gravity of the surrounding culture.
The Roman legionnaires' armor, the hopla, was heavy defensive equipment meant for survival in brutal hand-to-hand combat conditions.
Holiness is not passive refinement. It is mortification and vivification.
Yes, theological terms for killing and making alive.
You have to actively put sin to death, and you have to deliberately cultivate righteousness.
You cannot treat sin as a harmless companion or a pet.
No.
You must decisively reject the works of darkness, taking off the pajamas of lethargy and buckling on heavy steel.
So, if we were putting on armor, what specifically are we fighting against?
Paul doesn't leave it in the realm of abstract theory. He lists the specific enemies in verse 13.
He begins verse 13 with a positive command, right?
Let us walk honestly or decently.
Decently.
The Greek word euskimenos carries the sense of honorable conduct that can withstand the intense exposure of broad daylight.
Stuff you wouldn't be ashamed to do in front of everyone.
Yes. Then he arranges 6 specific vices into 3 pairs.
And this list is brutal.
The first pair targets public debauchery, revelry, and drunkenness.
The Greek words are komoi and methais. Right?
Yes. A komos was not just a fun dinner party that got a little loud.
What was it?
In extra-biblical literature, a komos was a wild nocturnal procession honoring the pagan god Bacchus.
Oh, wow.
It was public excess, surrendering all self-control to bodily appetite, roaming the streets with torches.
It was the ancient equivalent of a multi-day bender in the streets, celebrating total loss of inhibition.
The second pair targets sexual impurity, lewdness and licentiousness, or koitais and asalges.
Which means?
This refers to illicit sexual relations going outside the bounds of biblical marriage and a shameless, brazen sensuality that profanes the body.
It is an attitude that not only commits the sin, but flaunts it without any sense of shame.
Okay, so revelry, drunkenness, lewdness, licentiousness, the gutter sins.
The stuff everyone in the church agrees is wild and destructive.
But then we hit the third pair, strife and envy, arity and zelo.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Why is that?
Because Paul takes wild pagan orgies and drunken street parades, and he places them right next to strife, factional loyalty, and jealousy.
This raises an important question for modern church culture.
It really does.
We tend to meticulously categorize sins. We think the public, scandalous bodily sins are the real darkness.
Right.
But Paul says relational corruption, relational pride, constant bickering, bitter rivalries belongs to the exact same night.
A believer today might completely avoid the wild parties and the drunkenness.
They might think they're walking purely in the light.
But let's look at what this looks like in the 21st century.
Okay.
If they tolerate vicious gossip in their small group, if they harbor bitter theological rivalries that split congregations, or if they are nursing quiet resentment because they're looking at their friends' curated Instagram feeds and burning with envy.
Paul is saying, you are wearing the pajamas of the dark.
A person who cherishes envy has not learned to walk as in the day.
Competition for influence, resentment over another person's spiritual gifts, delighting in controversy on social media, these poison a congregation while appearing entirely respectable to the outside observer.
Darkness is not confined to the scandalous red light districts. It is just as active in the respectable pew.
That is a terrifying mirror to hold up.
If the law requires perfect love that does absolutely no harm to a neighbor, and if the night is ending and I look at that brutal list of vices, even the internal ones like envy, I feel completely defeated.
It's heavy.
If I am honest, I fail at this constantly. How can anyone perfectly execute this law of love and wear this heavy armor without completely failing and being crushed by the weight of it?
That is the crisis every honest reader must reach when confronted with the law of God.
It's a wall you just hit.
If this text is just a moral ladder we have to climb by our own strength, we are doomed. But Jesus is the sole fulfillment of this entire passage.
How does he fulfill it? Break down the mechanics of that.
In two specific ways, his active obedience and his passive obedience.
Let's start with the active.
First, his active obedience. Jesus is the only human being in history who actually kept the law perfectly for his neighbor.
Meaning he never broke any of those commands we just listed.
He never harbored a single thought of covetousness. He never stole. He never bore false witness. He never engaged in strife or envy.
He yielded perfect, unbroken, flawless love to God and to man for his entire earthly life. That is active obedience.
And passive obedience.
Right, what is that?
Passive obedience refers to his suffering on the cross. The law demands severe punishment for our strife, our envy, our lust, our failure to love.
The penalty for our sin.
Christ absorbed that precise wrath. He paid the unpayable debt. He took the penalty of the night upon himself so that we could walk in the day.
He is also the fulfillment of the timeline, right? He is the day that is dawning.
Yes. His resurrection was the first brilliant break of morning light into the present evil age.
And his physical return will utterly consume the night.
The light has entered the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
So when Paul says, put on the armor of light, how does that connect to Jesus?
Because in the very next verse, verse 14, Paul explicitly defines what that armor is. But put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ.
The armor is not a concept.
The armor is Christ himself. Believers are clothed in his imputed righteousness.
Imputed meaning credited to our account.
Credited to our account for our eternal standing before a holy God. When God looks at the believer, he sees the perfect record of Christ.
But we are also clothed in his imparted holiness for daily warfare.
The Holy Spirit dwells within the believer, providing the actual strength to resist the works of darkness in real time.
I want to make this really clear for anyone listening who might be feeling overwhelmed by the sheer weight of these commands.
It's crucial to state this.
This text is not a self-help manual. It isn't 10 easy steps to a better you.
No, the law is a mirror that exposes our total inability.
It crushes our self-righteousness, which is what it is designed to do.
It drives us to the cross for pardon when we fail, and it drives us to the Holy Spirit for the daily strength to fight the battle.
It is all of grace from beginning to end.
We love because he first loved us.
We awaken from our spiritual coma because his spirit rouses us.
We put on the armor because he provided it at the cross. Every single act of true holiness is participation in the life of the risen Lord.
So let's bring this all together. We have covered a massive amount of ground today on Romans 13.
We really have.
We learned that real biblical love isn't just a fleeting emotion or cultural agreement. It requires rigorously obeying God's boundaries for the genuine good of our neighbor.
We heard the alarm clock of redemptive history ringing.
The kairos.
The kairos, the appointed season, demands that we wake up from spiritual lethargy, because our final glorification, our bodily resurrection, is closer now than when we first believed.
And we saw the absolute necessity of trading the comfortable clothes of the dark for the heavy Roman armor of light,
Fighting not just the obvious gutter sins, but the quiet, respectable church sins like strife and envy.
all while resting completely in the finished work of Jesus Christ.
It is a sweeping, breathtaking call to arms for the Christian living in an increasingly dark and hostile culture.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Looking around at the world right now, the darkness feels incredibly heavy.
It really does.
The culture feels hostile, much like it did for those early believers sitting in a cramped house church in Rome. But the timeline is strictly in God's sovereign hands.
The night is far spent. The path is cut forward. The dawn is inevitable.
The absolute certainty of that coming morning should bring massive comfort, but it should also provoke intense self-examination.
Which leaves us with a final challenge to mull over as we end this deep dive.
If the day of Christ's return is truly dawning, and the morning light is going to expose absolutely everything,
What respectable sin in your daily routine, maybe a long-held grudge, maybe a digital habit of tearing people down online, or a quiet resentment against a friend, is actually a work of darkness actively resisting the sunrise?
that is the question we all must answer before the King. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking. We will see you next time.